For the first 90 minutes after you wake up, your brain is running on a neurological deficit so significant that researchers compare it to mild intoxication. Every decision you make in that window costs more energy than it should. Every distraction pulls harder, and every morning routine built on willpower alone is fighting a system designed to resist it. By the end of this video, you will have a precise 3-step protocol, grounded in cortisol and dopamine research, that takes under 10 minutes and restructures your entire cognitive output for the day. This is not a video about waking up earlier, drinking more water, or journaling for 30 minutes before sunrise. Those are fine habits, but they do not address the actual neurological problem. What you are about to see is the specific biological sequence your brain runs every single morning, and the one intervention that redirects it toward peak output instead of away from it. 3 steps, under 10 minutes, deployable today. Here's the problem most productivity advice completely ignores. The moment you wake up, your brain does not switch on like a light. It runs a biological boot sequence, one that evolution designed for threat scanning and survival orientation, not for reading emails or writing reports. Research on the cortisol awakening response, documented extensively since the late 1990s, shows that cortisol spikes sharply within the first 30 to 45 minutes of waking. That spike is not a stress response. It is your brain's priming mechanism, and whether it primes you for clarity or for chaos depends almost entirely on what you expose it to in those first minutes. Most professionals expose it to the worst possible inputs without realizing it. That is the sabotage, and it is costing the average knowledge worker somewhere between 2 and 3 hours of genuine cognitive capacity every single day. The cortisol awakening response, CAR, as researchers abbreviate it, peaks at roughly 38 to 75% above your baseline cortisol level within the first 30 minutes of waking. This is well established in psychoneuroendocrinology research, most notably through the work of Clemens Kirschbaum and Dirk Hellhammer. But here's what the productivity world consistently misrepresents. This cortisol spike is not inherently bad. In controlled studies, a robust CAR is actually associated with better working memory, stronger attentional control, and more effective prefrontal cortex engagement throughout the morning. The problem is that context hijacks it. When your first inputs are reactive, a news feed, a notification, a work email, your brain interprets that cortisol spike as a stress signal rather than a readiness signal. The amygdala registers urgency. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for strategic thinking, impulse control, and deep work, gets partially bypassed. The performance consequence of this is not subtle. Studies on prefrontal cortex load show that reactive morning inputs can reduce effective decision-making capacity by up to 40% for the following 2 to 3 hours. That is not a bad mood. That is a measurable reduction in your cognitive ceiling for the most important work hours of your day. The takeaway from this is simple but non-negotiable. The cortisol awakening window must be protected from reactive inputs, not filled with them. The average professional checks their phone within 4 minutes of waking. That single behavior restructures their neurological state for the next 3 hours, and almost no one has told them why. While cortisol is managing your arousal and readiness, your dopamine system is doing something equally critical and equally vulnerable in the morning. Wolfram Schultz's landmark research on dopamine and reward prediction, which earned a Nobel-adjacent level of recognition in neuroscience, established that dopamine is not primarily a pleasure chemical. It is a motivation and anticipation signal. Your brain releases dopamine when it expects a reward, and the size of that dopamine hit scales with how novel and uncertain the reward is. Social media, news feeds, and email are engineered around this exact mechanism. Every scroll is a variable reward loop. Every notification is an unpredictable dopamine trigger. When you engage with these inputs within the first 30 to 60 minutes of waking, you are not just getting distracted. You are resetting your dopamine baseline upward, calibrating your brain's reward threshold to a level that real work, strategic thinking, and deep focus physically cannot match. The performance consequence is direct. Your capacity for sustained motivation on cognitively demanding tasks collapses before you have started your first meeting. This is not a discipline problem. It is a neurochemistry problem. Research from the University of California on dopamine and task motivation found that high-stimulation morning inputs reduce reported motivation for low-stimulation cognitive work, reading, writing, analysis, by a statistically significant margin for up to 4 hours post-exposure. That is why your most important projects feel heavier on mornings when you start with your phone. You have raised the bar your brain needs to feel rewarded, and your actual work cannot clear it. Before most professionals open their first work document, they have already consumed enough dopamine-triggering stimuli to blunt their motivation for the entire morning block. The deep work session they planned at 9 a.m. is neurologically compromised before it begins. There's a third layer to the morning sabotage that most neuroscience-adjacent productivity content overlooks entirely, and it compounds the cortisol and dopamine problems into something more damaging. Roy Baumeister's research on ego depletion, later refined and contested, and then partially revalidated through replication studies, points to a real and measurable phenomenon. The prefrontal cortex has a finite processing budget per unit of time, and every decision, no matter how trivial, draws from it. This becomes lethal in the morning because of a specific pattern the research reveals. When reactive inputs, emails, news, notifications, become the first cognitive load of the day, they force dozens of micro-decisions in rapid succession. Do I respond to this? Is this urgent? How do I feel about that headline? Each one is small. Cumulatively, they are devastating. A 2011 study analyzing over 1,100 judicial decisions found that judges became significantly more likely to make default, low-effort rulings, deny parole, maintain status quo, as the morning progressed without a break. Decision fatigue was measurable and predictable. Now apply that to your day. If you spend the first 40 minutes of your morning processing reactive inputs, you are entering your most important professional hours with a prefrontal cortex already running on a depleted budget. The consequence is not just slower thinking, it is lower quality thinking on the decisions that actually shape your career. Strategic judgment, creative problem solving, and long-term planning all suffer. This is why your willpower is depleted by 2 p.m. regardless of how much sleep you got the night before. The morning routine set the depletion clock in motion hours earlier. 3 separate biological systems, cortisol priming, dopamine baseline calibration, and prefrontal decision budget, are all being degraded simultaneously by a single morning habit. And back in the hook, a loop was opened. There's one thing that interrupts all 3 at once. That is exactly what comes next. Here is the protocol, and here is why it works on all 3 systems at once. The research points to a specific sequencing intervention, not a lifestyle overhaul. Step 1. A 10-minute light and movement anchor within the first 15 minutes of waking. No screens. Natural light exposure, confirmed in research by Stanford's Andrew Huberman and others, triggers the healthy cortisol awakening response by confirming to your circadian system that the spike is a readiness signal, not a threat response. Light anchors cortisol to clarity. Brief movement, a walk, stretching, anything non-screen based, activates dopamine through motor reward pathways at a baseline level, meaning you enter the rest of your morning without having artificially elevated the dopamine threshold. Step 2. A single written intention statement before any reactive input. Not a journal, 1 sentence. What is the one cognitive output that matters most today? This is not motivational ritual, it is prefrontal cortex priming. Writing a concrete intention activates the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the exact region responsible for goal-directed attention, before any decision debt accumulates. Studies on implementation intentions by Peter Gallwitzer at NYU show that people who articulate a specific intended action are up to 3 times more likely to execute it under conditions of distraction, which describes every professional's morning. Step 3. A 20-minute reactive input blackout after steps 1 and 2. Not forever. 20 minutes. This prevents the dopamine baseline reset, preserves the cortisol readiness signal, and protects the decision budget for the work that actually moves your career forward. Total time, under 10 minutes of active effort. The result, according to the Convergent research, sharper prefrontal engagement in the first 2 to 3 hours of the workday, measurably better goal-directed attention, and a decision budget that lasts through your afternoon instead of collapsing before lunch. This is the loop the hook opened. This is the one thing, a sequenced, science-grounded 3-step protocol that addresses all 3 morning sabotage mechanisms simultaneously. Here's something worth reflecting on. Of the 3 systems covered, cortisol priming, dopamine baseline, and decision budget, one of them is almost certainly the dominant sabotage mechanism in your specific morning. Drop a number in the comments. 1 for cortisol, 2 for dopamine, or 3 for decision debt. It takes 3 seconds, and it will tell you exactly which step of the protocol deserves the most attention first. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, peer-reviewed research translated into a same-day system without the fluff, then the next video on this channel is going to be directly relevant. It covers the specific 90-minute deep work architecture that pairs with this morning protocol. The precise block structure, backed by ultradian rhythm research, that allows a time-starved professional to produce 4 hours of cognitive output in less than 2. Subscribe to Growth Daily and that video will be waiting. 1 lever, 1 system, every week. No 10-step routines requiring 3 free hours.